Let me first say that there's, I think, a nuanced difference in the title between how it sounds in Malayalam and how it sounds in English. Janangalum in Malayalam is people, but masses, has a slightly different Bahujanangalam. Even if you say Bahujanangalam, it doesn't have the feel of the masses. I don't want to say that. Because masses comes with connotations which are interesting to explore. So, I don't have much time. I'm trying to try and look at it in two different ways. Let's look at first mass as the idea of numbers, as a huge sea of people. And as far as music or any art form goes, the first question for me is, when did the idea of an art form or music becoming mass actually happen? One thing, you can do the mics later. Just relax. You can also listen. Thanks. So, for example, was there anything called mass music, say, 200, 300 years ago? It's a very interesting question to explore, because I'm not sure that there was. Society, like it is now, was at one point of time divided by various caste groups, ethnicities, languages, dialects, locality, localism, and therefore art kind of was practiced within these various social, cultural webs. There was, of course, osmosis, seepages, appropriations happening according to the various structures in these societies. But was there an art form that covered, say, what Bollywood does today? I don't think there was. I don't think anything like that existed. So in terms of quantities or in terms of numbers, mass seems to be a relatively new idea in which the idea of technology as we understand it today plays a huge role. For example, even in the Carnatic stage, my seniors would always say that in 1920s there were thousands of people. It's practically impossible that thousands of people could have heard anything happening on stage. But it felt like thousands of people. I think that's the beautiful part of it. They felt there were 1,000 people. There were probably 150 people pushing it. Then comes the microphone. The microphone changes the dynamics of it and allows allows all of you to listen to me today, for example, with a microphone. Now, but then that really doesn't tally. In that case, any art form that got a microphone, got tech, should be able to be mass. It doesn't happen that way too, right? So something else goes on in this mechanism of what becomes mass or what hits many, many more people. And I think in which we have to say, as far as India goes, cinema is probably the largest body. You could even ask this question, for example, about Western popular music. It is internationally probably the largest mass of listening. Is there something in it qualitatively, that's the question, right, that makes it accessible to many people? It's a very tricky question, a very debatable question, probably requires an hour or two, but I'm going to throw the question out there to think about it. It's also a slippery slope in terms of how I'm judging it. The other connotation of mass, and especially for a person coming from within quotes the so-called classical arena, is a kind of a mass generally means lower quality. And its antithesis, being represented by people like me, is class, right? So the idea that if something is accessible for a huge number of people, it automatically becomes qualitatively lesser. Or unless you go to the lowest common denominator, there is no way you're going to access more people. This is something we have consumed as the truth, as the complete truth. So the inverse of that is presumption that anything I do as a Carnatic musician automatically becomes something of class, which is also a complete falsity. There can be a lot of rubbish happening on the classical stage. I'll give you another example for it. Even if people have never heard my music, they just know my name as a classical musician, I'm automatically given respect. They don't even know how I sing. They probably have not heard one note I have sung. So the fact that I represent a certain body of class automatically bestows it with something of a speciality. Within this hierarchy, there is the operation of social hierarchy. Who are the members of the so-called mass? Who are the members of the so-called class? And in the Indian context, caste and gender play a very, very, very important role. Art forms that are stationed at the upper echelons of social structure are automatically presumed to be of something that is difficult. For example, we'll say classical music is not for everybody. It's very difficult to understand. It's very complex. You have to spend hours in riyaz, which is all true. But the other side is also true. I don't know, for example, when I listen to a film song, do I know what arrangement has happened behind in the string section? I don't understand it. It's very complicated. Even as a classical musician, I don't understand it. So the fact that energy and effort and time needs to be put into the so-called classical, whereas that is not required for the consumption of the mass, is also something we have to think very deeply about and not take it at face value. But there is also levels of separations within these categories. All cinema is not mass cinema. We have another word, art cinema. So you have art cinema and then you have mass. Rajinikanth is mass. But even within mass, Kamala Hassan is slightly less mass. How is that possible? So how are we evaluating these very, very interesting categorizations? Is it on basis of ticket sales? No, it usually is not. Is it on the basis of the number of fan clubs that these people have? No, it is not. We are saying something else. We are saying certain modes of expression, certain discussions of seriousness, whatever that means, automatically elevates the discourse of the art form. Now, if those modes of discussion, ways of expression, topics of discussion tick the box that is required, then the elevation automatically starts happening. This is how we presume it. But the problem with this kind of an understanding, I'll give you an analogy, musical analogy for that, is like, for example, percussion. Parayatam is a dance form, a rhythmic dance form, practiced by generally the Dalit community. It's an incredibly beautiful art form. A person playing a tabla or playing a mridangam would not see that with seriousness. If a stroke from that art form enters my concert stage, I will turn and glare. I will glare at my percussionist. Why are you playing this cheap stroke? There's another word we use, cheapness. So we are automatically saying that Parayatam is accessible to more people, to a certain kind of people. It talks a certain language, which is a forceful language on your face, which is the context of the Dalits community. Their poetry, their language, their art form is at your face because they are placed at the lower level in society. The only way larger society will listen is if you push it on their face and tell them, we exist, we have culture, we have art, we have beauty. So every practice then becomes a force to make a point. And there is beauty in that forceness, in that form of aggressive repudiation of the larger society. Whereas for me, that's not required. Then I will use very interesting words, nuance, subtlety, softness, suggestivity. Because I can afford to use those words from the position I am seated in. So again, we are categorizing these emotive qualities according to who is practicing it, where it is practiced, and very importantly, let's not forget who's consuming it. That's a very important factor in this. Who is listening to my art form is also a very, very important aspect of whether I consider mass. So then the next question is, two parts to a question, is can an art form, I'll look at both sides, that is say situated within the quote class category, become mass? And many times I have been asked this question because I work in this arena of trying to break the large castle down. and say there's nothing so supreme about what I sing, just listen to it like you listen to anything else. So the question is, okay, you say this, but then can it become like A.R. Rahman? I think that's actually an erroneous question to ask. The question that needs to be asked is, can the diversity that exists in the people who listen to A.R. Rahman also listen to this music? Oh, that's a different question. So if mass does not mean numbers, but mass means different kinds of people, then we are discussing something totally different. And that interests me. So the question for me is, can Carnatic music, the form that I practice, or Khayal or Dhrupad or whatever it is in the Indian context, be heard by a larger, diverse group of people? Or a question before that, why don't a diverse set of people come to listen to this form of music? Again, the cop-out answer is to say it's very difficult. But I think that's actually a fraudulent answer. The truth is, the discourse we build around these art forms is the problem. The language we speak, what we consider are qualities that are required for listening to this art form. You can ask anybody who's new to a classical audience, who comes to a concert for the first time. It could be Indian classical music, it could be Western classical music. Go to an opera. Everybody know you're an outsider. They will just know. How will they know it's amazing? You don't need to say, you don't have to say a word. You walk in. My friends have told me, I'm not coming to your concert anymore because I'm intimidated. And I said, did anybody say anything to you? They said nothing to me. They looked at me. So the environment itself positions the insider and the outsider, the known insider, the unknown outsider, the body language of the insider, knowing when to applaud, knowing what is greatness in the music. All this and the conversation we build around the music, whether it's about the literature of the music or the artists, the myths that are created, which are like both larger than any of the artists themselves, and the mysticity that is also created. Some artists may feel that mysticity is necessary. In the world of social media, they are really worried nowadays that there's lack of mysticity because everything is now in the open. I'm not convinced that mysticity is actually required. If it's there in your voice, it'll happen. Otherwise, you don't have it. You don't need, a grand self beyond what you do. So, if we can change the discourse, then diversity is possible. And I think in the last 10 years, I can say with some confidence that I have pushed the possibility of diversity a little bit. Not too much, but whatever is possible from my side. Then the other side of the conversation is, how can an art form that has been pushed to the corners of society or considered mass because it is consumed and practiced by certain sections of society become, within quotes, a companion of the class or the class itself? I remember many years ago, I'm forgetting the name now. I'll come back. A good friend of mine from the US, who was an ethnomusicologist, Harold Powers. Powers was one of the first people to come to India and do his PhD. And he first studied Carnatic music, and then he studied Hindustani music, went to Varanasi, and his PhD was on a kind of ragas. So many years ago, when I was much younger, had not even had conversations about what I was doing, he came home for a cup of coffee, and I said, Harold, what's the difference between folk and classical? He said, oh, that's very simple. He said, as it goes up society, it goes from folk to classical, that's all. And that was an eye-opener for me. At that point, I didn't believe him. I said, this is just nonsense. You're just saying if different set of people practice something, it goes up the hierarchy, something becomes classical, and as you think about it deeper and deeper, there is a lot of truth to that point. So the question I'm asking is, how do we invert it from the other side, right? And that is a different process. So one of the things we tend to do is, if we say, just like I say, more people of diversity should participate in the classical forms, whether it's on the stage or in the audience or in writing or in research or in academia. Is the same operation possible on the other side? For example, suppose I start dancing Parayatam tomorrow morning, or people like me with caste privilege and class privilege. No, that's a very, very different situation. Because there I am starting to take the art form away from its roots and appropriate it even before it has been allowed to get the respect and dignity it needs to have for the community and for the art form. So I can't just say teach it to everybody so everybody does it. No. This has happened, and this is where I think I go back to Bollywood or Collywood or Tollywood or whatever the word is. They have done it ad nauseum. They would pick up an art form that belongs to a community. They will cinema it, make it, in their words, commercial, sellable, and turn the entire art form on its head. And the reverse problem happens there because the people actually practicing now have to sing like what is on cinema. Otherwise, their audience are not listening to them anymore. I've had artists say, sir, what do I do now? I want to sing what our stuff is, but I can't sing it because this bastardized song has become so popular, I have to now sing that. So the question is, they are asking is, am I singing the form or am I singing film music? What am I singing? So the complexity is very different. So there what we need to do as a society is empower the art form, the community, by inverting how we provide stages, inverting how we have a discourse on the art form, and actually moving aside, which is the most difficult thing to do. Then, when that art form challenges my power, challenges my aesthetic snootiness, at that point we can have an equal conversation. Until then, it's an unequal conversation. I cannot have that conversation. I have to listen until then. So, the way in which something that is considered class can be made accessible to a larger audience, vis-a-vis something that's marginalized, made accessible or made equal to everything that occupies the upper stages, is very different. Now, in all this, where does cinema stand, or where does that popular, the real popular stand? And that's a very difficult one. Why is it everybody, let me ask a musical question. Why is it everybody can hum a cinema song, but they can't that easily hum a classical song? So I have been sometimes told, simplify the form. And I've had deep problems with that attitude. Because the first thing that statement does, it tells me that all the people sitting in front of me are not intellectually good enough to take the form as it is. That's what you're actually saying. You're saying this is such a great form that the Aam Janta cannot access it. So, make it easy. To me, that is as bad, that is terrible. It's like saying nobody understands physics, let's just make physics easy or something like that. Doesn't work. But why is there something that is hummable, simply, and everybody can hum it? But why is it some forms people cannot? Now, these some forms, like I said right in the beginning, are not only the classical forms. There are songs in so many traditions, in so many sections of society that I can't hum. When I go and listen to songs in, for example, in Kuthu or something, I can't hum those songs. I can't even give my voice the way the Kuthu artist gives their voice. I don't even know how to do it. Right? So it is not just the classical that is difficult to hum or to repeat. So there is something else that cinema music does that allows for what you could call hummability, or the earworm phenomena, where a tune continues to stay. The point is, does everything need to be hummable? Two is, does everything need an audience of lakhs of people? That's a fundamental question. We forget, during COVID, for example, we worked with a lot of artistic communities around the country. And if you turn it on its head and think about it, probably 98 to 97% of the art forms are not mass. 1% or maybe 0.5% is mass, which is cinema music and popular music, or cinema, whatever. Instead of asking the inverse question of saying, why is it there that 1% does not have the diversity of the 98%, we are asking the 98% to become like that 1%. Now, I can't think of a most ridiculous thing that we expect of society. So what is that 1% actually doing? It is homogenizing every one of us. It is homogenizing every one of us, homogenizing all the art forms by claiming the power of numbers and hummability or repetition and saying, why are you guys so different? Why are you singing different tunes? Why are you singing different ragas? Why don't you just sing like we sing? Or we sing now, we'll change tomorrow, change with us tomorrow. We change day after, again change with us day after. How different is it from the politics of India today? It is not at all different, is it? We have 0.2% of this country, I don't even know if that percentage is right, who wants the rest of the 98% to become like that? Why do you have so many faiths? Waste of time. Have one faith. And why one faith? Have one way of worshipping within that faith. Why do you all wear different clothes? Wear the same clothes. Why do you all speak different languages? Let's all speak the same languages. Why do you all eat different food? Let's all eat the same food. It's not very different. It's exactly the same thing that we expect a powerful cultural majority, if I may say so, or a claimed cultural majority, to be even more accurate and nuanced, who is forcing upon us something. And that's exactly what we are doing when we talk about the mass and people and music. And the only way we can resist it as much as we can resist it in the socio-political climate of this country is to say no. The fact that there is a conversation, musical conversation between this 98%, however complicated it may be, however difficult it may be, our job is to create bridges of conversations among the 98% of the various clusters of people and dances and music and plays and languages and dialects and that exist. How many conversations can be created? How many bridges can be created? How many contestations are we willing to face up to and actually talk about? Our failure is our inability to do that. If we did that, we wouldn't be in the problem that we exist today. Or we wouldn't have people like me sitting on a high horse thinking I'm singing something so supremely special that if somebody didn't like it, that there's a problem with that person and not with what I am doing. It is possible to have different kinds of masses of people. And I'm saying masses in terms of kinds of people. For every art form, as long as we're going to deal with all the aberrations that exist in our society. If you're not willing to do that, then we will want to make everything that mass. And that mass, which I am now referring to, irrespective of what it is, if I may say so, that is the lowest common denominator, not all that we discussed till now. We don't want to fall into that lowest common denominator because it taps into and stations us in a thoughtless, in an actually feelingless mode. Because only when you're feelingless can you think violence is okay. If you feel, you can't think violence is okay. So that mass is a mass of thoughtless, feelingless existence, of mindless consumption, of titillation, which also doesn't have any value. Thank you very much.